So great to have you, Bill. I'm so looking forward to our discussion today.
Thank you.
And I wanted to, for folks that don't know, Guidehouse has published a home energy management leaderboard for the past several years. If you could go into that a little bit more for our audience who's not as familiar with the report, what metrics it covers, and the area of focus.
Certainly, I'd be happy to. The home energy report is something that Guidehouse Insights has done about every 2 years for the last 10 years. It looks at the different technologies that can tell a homeowner about their electric usage. I mean, we're used to getting a report that says I've used X number of kilowatt hours and here's the bill and you pay the bill. But over the years, it's dramatically improved. The different technologies have broken into two categories. One is based on AMI data that is then taken by the utility to use in different ways, disaggregate the different usage types, and provide a report to the user. So presumably they would be able to go, I'm using an awful lot of electricity for lighting or for washing or for heating. And based on that, they would be able to make informed decisions about their energy efficiency areas where they could improve. Same kind of outcome comes from technology that can be solved in the electric panel. Often this is done by the homeowner with the help of a qualified electrician to put some technology into the electric panel and provide the same kind of information. So Guidehouse has been doing this for 12 years. I've looked at the different reports over the years in preparation for this latest report, look at the different kinds of companies that provide this kind of service. The information that is derived from the disaggregated data is used in a variety of different ways, and that's been a lot of the difference in the technology over the years. Also, the makeup of the companies that are involved in this particular space has evolved dramatically. I mean, just the report 2 years ago, about half the companies that were involved in the business have merged, changed their focus, have offered different solutions. So it's a very, very dynamic market.
Could you speak a little bit about what are the metrics that you use to, or the criteria you use to evaluate the different vendors and kind of what differentiates the leaders from the rest of the pack?
All right. In this report, there are 12 metrics that all of the participants are measured against. 6 are on strategic issues like vision and technology. 6 are on tactical implementation. What's the marketing material? How is the information presented? So each company gets a different ranking. Each of the different 12 scores have a weighting, and then we plot it on a chart and let the chips fall where they may. Then there's a process with other subject matter experts within Guidehouse Insights to justify why was this number higher than this number? Why is this organization here? Why is that organization there? Who's ranked first, second, third, so on down the line. And so it's a careful vetting process because inevitably you're going to get questions from the people that are involved. All of them are valid companies, but they have different approaches. And particularly when you get to the area of vision, that's a very subjective effort. And so it's important that I be able to articulate why this company has a better vision than that company.
Could you speak a little bit more about kind of what made the leaders stand out as part of the leaderboard, and maybe how the evolution of home energy reports as an industry has changed, or maybe mirrors to other industries like telecommunication?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the most important ways that this report has changed is rather than just providing information, statistics to the homeowner, which they can take a look at and go, okay, I spend 10% of my power on lighting. Is that good? Is that bad? I spend 15% of my electricity in cooking. Is that high? Is that low? How do I evaluate this information? What has changed is taking the information and providing data so that the customer can take a look and go, I'm using a lot more power for lighting than all the neighbors in my area, than people who have the same size house. I should take a look at that and figure out what I should do about it. So with superior information that comes from the data analytics, it really makes a difference. Ultimately, what the leaders stood out is that they were providing information that people could take action to reduce their costs, reduce carbon emissions, get greater customer satisfaction, and ultimately develop a closer relationship with their utility. Historically, utilities have been nothing but a service provider, but that's not how the future is going to be. We saw this in the telecommunications industry 20, 30 years ago, when there was deregulation going on with the telecommunications utilities. There were certain companies that decided that they were going to compete on price, that was going to be the sole extent of their marketing effort, that they were going to provide low price and be a pipeline. We don't hear about those companies anymore. What happened is that the companies who added services, offered flexibility, offered different solutions for different segments of the market, those are the ones that went and acquired the companies that thought they could win based on price. That's not how it worked, and the utility industry faces the same kind of challenges today. What's going to work in the future is having a partnership with your customers, and that partnership starts by being able to segment the different types of users, creating a relationship so that the customer feels respected, not just respected or treated equal, which is a table stakes for being in the industry. They're able to get information from their utility about how they can improve their day-to-day life, how they can better use technology at a lower cost, and along comes with that lower costs and lower carbon emissions. That's the future, and in looking at where the leaders succeeded, that was the technique, that was the method, that was what they all had in common, and that's where Bidgley is.
Are there any key themes among the leaders that you spoke a little bit about their strategy and kind of their vision is very similar in meeting decarbonization, but are there any key strategies or trends among the leaders that are worth noting?
The way people use electricity is different than other consumer products, but we're all human, we're all consumers. And the things that motivate people, that motivate consumer behavior, there are three things. First, there is, I'm the kind of person who does this. There's your self-identity. Second, there's, I want to stand out among my peers. And the third is convenience. And electricity has always been about convenience. And that's where most of the new appliances over the generation have come from. But those three particular areas, if you are able to leverage them, you're able to get the customer happy. You're able to get the customer to change their behavior, to be more energy efficient, or to use lower carbon technology. They're not aware of how they use how their usage affects carbon technology, and 99.9% of the customers wouldn't understand it if you had to explain it to them. But you can motivate them to do behavior through the proper technology, and the home energy management report is the primary way to do it with disaggregation and information so that they can change their behavior. So, for example, a friend of mine was an early innovator on electric vehicles. And electric vehicles, his electric EV, I can't express how envious I was of how that worked. And that's what I want. So his status went up. His self-identity is that he's one of the innovators in EV. And that is one of the dramatic ways that we're going to make this, we're going to make the world more efficient, reduce carbon emissions, and that is a motivator of what's happening. So we may talk about all the technology or the environmental benefits that are associated with electric vehicles, but a lot of it is driven by just the humanity and human nature. And as long as the Home Energy Report is able to communicate that at that level, we're going to see a radical improvement. We're going to see a radical improvement in how people behave when it comes to their use of electricity. With the information that you can get from a home energy report, you're able to look at that information and at least be told that there's an opportunity for improvement. Now, these days we have intelligent thermostats that take care of that issue, but it's the kind of thing that human nature is not necessarily simple or linear, and that the technology that's now inherent in the leaders on the Home Energy Management Report have a way to communicate to the user about ways to improve sometimes with the technology that they already have.
Yeah, that's so true that the home energy report kind of actually enables a two-way communication, it enables another communication vehicle between the utility and the customer, whereas those programs, the customer might be doing it wrong for several months, a year, and then you find out at the end. But with analytics and with being able to send the reports, they can get feedback more immediate, right?
Exactly.
And see actually if they're doing it right.
But when you provide that kind of information, and it's useful information to the customer, it is sometimes called product discrimination. Now, discrimination has a negative connotation with us, but in this particular case, you have information that you can provide with the people that have struggled with the programming of their programmable thermostat, and you're able to send them information. If you send that information to someone who doesn't have a programmable thermostat, it's a waste of their time. If you send it to someone who has an intelligent thermostat, they're going, why are you wasting my time? I don't have that old technology. And so by knowing your customer and having that kind of information, you can tailor the message and you can improve the outcome. And that's what this is all about. We're not in the business of finding quirks about human nature. We're interested in improving customer satisfaction, decarbonizing, and improving energy efficiency.
Many of utilities now leverage home energy reports for energy efficiency primarily. Could you speak a little bit more about how effective that is and maybe troubles and challenges that they've had in that?
Yes, one of the primary objectives of home energy reports is to encourage energy efficiency. The challenge with energy efficiency is that it's not linear. People are not that simple. So one of the great things that have happened in the last 10 years is the presence of LED lighting. LED lighting uses a fraction of the power that an incandescent light uses. I have to admit that when I had roommates and within my family, I was the incandescent light police. And I would go around and I would shut off the incandescent lights that were not being used. And it was a bad habit. And with LED lights, I've broken myself of that trend. And because I know that the cost of using the power is so low that it's really not worth getting up off of the sofa and going and turning off the light. Apparently, a lot of people have that same notion. So as a rule of thumb, an LED light uses a quarter of the power of an incandescent light. And so one simplistic view of this is that if you replace all of the incandescent lights with LED lights, the lighting bill should drop to a quarter of what it was. That's not what happened. People left lights on longer. Now, you could argue that they got more enjoyment out of having the lights on, and so that's a valid use of power. But if your efficiency program is based upon assumptions that people used lights for X number of hours, we put in LED lights and the bill will drop proportionally, that's not largely what happens. That's called the rebound effect, where people leave the lights on a little bit more, leave it to burn because it's nice to have a well-lit house. And so if you make the simple assumption, you're going to be disappointed. And that has happened not just with LED lights, but in a few areas. On the other hand, there have been some programs where they put in more efficient appliances, and there's an improvement, and that's all a wonderful thing. They saw in refrigerators that don't really depend upon consumer use that they did get significant energy efficiency. So it depends very much upon the nature of the program. There were two economists back in the 70s that noticed that when people went and got more fuel efficient cars because the price of oil and gas spiked in the 70s, what they noticed is that people ended up using even more of gas because it was so cool that they now had a very efficient appliance. In this case, they had a very efficient car, and they were excited about it and drove around more. And that effect is named after the two economists who identified that, and it's called the Kazum-Brooks postulate. And the fact of the matter is we see that sometimes. Now, we didn't quite see that with LED lighting, but we've seen that with other technology. So, for example, with washing machines, people have been using their washing machines for years, and they develop a pattern. They get a new high efficiency. So instead of about 30 cents per load, it's 25% per load. Well, now they start separating the whites and the lights and the darks and the synthetics, running smaller loads. So they increase the number of times that they're using their washing machine. They're getting better results. Presumably they're happier, but it ends up using more power because they now have a high efficiency appliance. And that's human nature. Again, we're not here to look at interesting human nature. We're interested in improving outcomes, reducing carbon emissions, and increasing energy efficiency.
I think that's exactly why it's so important to keep track of these leaderboards, because as human nature, home energy reports need to evolve, right? They need to have more detail and kind of keep up to date with how people are behaving. They can't just be the same kinds of reports, because people will start to drown them out over time. So
oh, yes.
I think that's really great.
One of the important things about home energy reports is that we will get increasingly more targeted to more narrow programs. Interestingly, there was a program for pool pumps, and there have been many innovations in pool pumps to improve their efficiency. And actually, those are huge energy drains. But not a lot of us have pools at our homes. Mm-hmm. And so while it's a worthwhile program, if you were to broadcast that kind of a solution to the mass market, you would get a lot of funny looks. You'd get a lot of people who would turn off from getting that kind of message, because if I don't have a pool, I live in an apartment and it has a pool, but I have nothing to do with how the energy is managed there, it's not going to be a good message. It's not going to be meaningful, and I'm going to discount the credibility and potentially miss useful information that would be of value.
We spoke a lot about energy efficiency. I'm wondering about some of those other objectives that you've mentioned, decarbonization, and even for non-regulated utilities, churn reduction and customer satisfaction. How are you seeing those trends and the leaders using home energy reports to achieve those objectives?
There are any number of strategic marketing plans that you can get based upon disaggregation information. Having that information of how that this person does a lot of cooking, but this person does a lot of cleaning, and this person does a lot of home entertainment, you're able to customize your message to achieve the objectives of the organization. Sometimes that's reducing power. Sometimes that's increasing customer satisfaction. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that can affect reliability. The future is going to bring more home energy storage. It's going to bring smarter AMI meters. And there's going to be a shift where I'm just used to taking in power and calling it good. We're starting to see a shift of net metering where you're sending power from your solar panels or perhaps some other distributed energy resource back into the grid. You can increase the voltage, tune the frequency, all kinds of capabilities. That's going to be a very different environment than what we're used to. And that's not going to come organically. That's going to come through marketing communication. So right now, that's a small part of the kind of information you can communicate through a home energy report. And let me be clear, when we say home energy report, it's based upon the original notion of we want people to see visually how they're using power. But that is kind of an older term that doesn't represent what the future is going to look like. But we decided to stick with home energy management as the terminology. But what it's going to do is it's the basis for creating a marketing campaign so that consumers can understand the world has changed, my relationship with the utility has changed, and I have both the ability to receive power, send power, collaborate with my neighbors. All the changes that we're expecting within the electrical industry is really contained in what we're calling the home energy report.
Mm-hmm. And that's such a good point you made, this home energy management, and not just, it's not going to be just a paper report, a static paper report anymore. It's going to be text messages, it's going to be campaigns, it's going to be alerts that are coming depending on which programs you're assigned to. That's kind of all encompassed in home energy management.
That's right. Yeah, the home energy report was a paper report that you got and said, oh, I use more energy when the weathers are extreme. That's interesting, but that's not very meaningful. It's not going to motivate me to do the right thing. I'm going to get information in the future we see that you have an electric vehicle. Well, it could just be my friend's EV who's staying over for a couple of days on his vacation. It could be that I bought one and I'm kicking the tires. It could be that I have one now and I'm interested in participating in a virtual power plant program. So you don't know, you see the technology, but there needs to be a way different than just the plain old bill insert about what's going to be happening with the future. And through that, the customer can then adjust their expectations and their behavior to achieve societal goals. The interesting thing is that the surveys are showing very clearly that there was a time when people just looked at the utility as a utility, but now with greater awareness, they want to be a part of the solution. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, what we now call home energy report or home energy management is the mechanism to enable that. So as you said, it will be through text, it will be through emails, it will be through visualizations. It will allow the consumer to change their behavior, know when to charge their EVs, when to charge their home energy storage system, to adjust their thermostat automatically based on contextual information. And so the exciting capabilities of the future, which will engage consumers in ways that we even struggle to imagine today, is what the future is going to look like.
So we talked a bit about how segmentation is so important, and with the clean energy future, equity is extremely important in making sure LMI customers are coming along in that journey. Can you speak a little bit more about maybe the techniques and the challenges that home energy management will have in helping low-income customers?
Yes, low and medium income customers, every customer needs to be treated with dignity. I mean, that's just a basic requirement. The way that the industry has traditionally approached that is to treat every ratepayer with the same standards, policies, and procedures. And as a rule, my experience with utilities is that they're very concerned individuals who are very committed to providing equal service to all people. That's just the nature of the people who work within the industry. At the same time, it's a mistake to assume that everyone has the same values, and that's when we get to equity. There is an assumption about how people, there can be an assumption of how people should behave when they have limited and moderate income. And that should be that they should take whatever charity is given. It's much more complicated than that. The best approach is to understand the different values of different market segments and appeal to that. And so some programs, when it comes to serving low and moderate income, tend to have some assumptions that come with them that limit their success. So for example, we'll give you a new oven that's more efficient. Well, for that family, it could be that the oven was the center of all their family gatherings, and that oven has an emotional connection with how their family run. So the fact that it's inefficient is less important than they would get a new oven. And on one hand, we may sit there and go, it's an appliance. It doesn't have any soul, but it does have a soul to the people who've lived there for generations and have lots of family gatherings and lots of friends gatherings. So to just say, well, you should do this because it's more efficient, misses their humanity. And that's a unfortunate theme in many of the programs. And so if what you do is you roll out programs that are most appropriate for the organizational objectives, for societal objectives, and fit the personality of the community in which you're working, you're going to be much more successful. Many of the competitors in the leaderboard pursue different segments. Some pursue tier one utilities, which tend to have a broader range. Other solutions are more targeted, are more focused to a particular area. There are also important differences around the world in different regions. The overall market for home energy management reporting is over $5 billion a year. It's growing overall at over 10%, and it's a very dynamic, competitive environment. There are important differences between the competitors on who they target. Some target tier one utilities, other target municipalities, others target co-op. So there are important differences, and the more narrow you get, the more effective the marketing program is going to be. Other areas have different competitors for marketing the same kind of solution. The Asia Pacific market is going to be the fastest growing market in the coming 10 years. So the success depends upon setting goals and achieving them methodically, move on to the next one. Don't try all at once. That will end in disaster.
It's great speaking with you today. I'm wondering if you can kind of close it out with our audience, any kind of last takeaways that they should take, or how they can learn a bit more about home energy management or their solutions with Guidehouse.
Yes. Guidehouse Insights produces syndicated reports that talk about the residential use of power. It's always fascinating because people are interesting. People behave differently than you might assume. That's what makes it fun. These reports that we produce often look at that. We also write blogs that talk about narrow topics that often turn into reports, analyst reports about where the technology is going, how people behave, how the industry is reacting to different influences, changes in priority, customer service, reducing emissions. These are all things that evolve over time. Reliability becomes critical when there are newsworthy stories that show large people without power, and it's a constantly changing dynamic. And the Guidehouse Insights blog site and the Guidehouse Insights website has information on how this is all evolving.
Great. Thanks for going today. Welcome back to our live portion of our conference today. We have Will from Guidehouse joining us for our live Q&A. And I'd love to just dive right into it because we don't have too much time for a Q&A session. We heard a lot about the Guidehouse Home Energy Report and the home energy management research that you guys have done. Tell me a little bit more about what's the urgency for all of this. Power utilities have been doing fine for decades with their kind of marketing efforts. Why is marketing suddenly so important today?
Well, there are a number of reasons why marketing has become important, and it's primarily because it's been enabled by having AMI data. If the only information you have about a broad customer base is one, is it a residence, or two, is it commercial and industrial? About the only bit of information you can reliably get is the amount of power that they use. By having information which you can then disaggregate, it allows you to have the basis for making evaluations about the way that they use, the way that individual or that organization uses power. And that's a very powerful tool because there are a number of programs that a utility can offer that only are relevant to certain segments of the population. And communicating information that otherwise isn't relevant, information on, heating a pool to an apartment dweller, is actually counterproductive to developing an effective relationship. So by having these tools, it is now possible to better serve particular segments that in the past hadn't been done. The other driver for the need for marketing is, in the past, there wasn't an opportunity. There was regulatory standards that prevented there from being really any competition of any size. And now a number of regulatory agencies are looking for ways to encourage competition to get lower prices for consumers. And without the use of marketing to better serve customers and provide additional services, what will happen is that new entrants will come into the market and find a way to siphon off the most profitable customers. Now, in the beginning stages, that's not that big a deal, but over time, if a utility chooses to wait and see on how the marketing works and learn the techniques, roll it out slowly, they're going to be in a situation where their most profitable customers are siphoned away, that they have different solutions. And at that point, regaining trust and regaining that customer is a much more complicated effort.
So we lost you just at the end of the last question for the importance of marketing. I kind of got regulatory as well as technology being great drivers. If you want to close this up for the last reason, folks should be concerned.
The last reason is that, so we have the regulatory where there's an encouragement of competition, but the third is the environmental progress. What we saw during the energy crisis way back in the 70s is that there's now a real financial incentive to pursue more economical solutions. Now it's not just economics, it's about the environment. And by providing customers real information on what's happening within their home, how they use power different than their neighbors, it creates a real incentive when just economics didn't move the needle. There's now information that they can say, I'm tending to overuse this kind of power. I'm tending to use, my appliances are outdated and it's time to update them. And so that's an opportunity for marketing from the utility that's very targeted and with specific information that wasn't available before to make a difference.
Great. And I just have one more question from the audience. If you could share a little bit about advice for utilities as they are looking to improve their marketing efforts and they are evaluating solutions like Bidgely, Oracle, Uplight that have technology components around customer engagement. What are some advice or things that they should keep in mind as they're evaluating these solutions?
There are two things to keep in mind. First, it's important to invest in a platform that the center of the system that's important is the disaggregation. And that requires a lot of planning and consideration. And make an investment in the platform and then take it where it leads you. Second thing is to be very careful in rolling out marketing programs. The temptation is to do everything all at once. And particularly in an organization that isn't known for producing marketing material, targeted marketing material, it needs to be rolled out methodically and carefully, keeping in mind that the people who are implementing the programs have a set of experience, a lot of enthusiasm about the solution, and that the target audience doesn't always perfectly align with the expectations of the people who are implementing the program. They're all interested in saving money. They're all interested in helping the environment, but to different degrees. And it's important to recognize the priorities and values of the people that you're targeting when you're rolling out a marketing program, because in the past, it was one size fits all. In the future, it's not all one size fits all.
Great. I think that that's actually one of our last questions that we had on here. I want to do a little bit of a follow-up to that. You mentioned a little bit already about mistakes that utilities can fall into in their marketing in terms of maybe taking on too much. Can you go into any other examples of the mistakes that they should maybe try to avoid as they're going about?
Well, I think the biggest, the big one is trying to do too many projects simultaneously. You disappoint on all of them, and then it becomes an embarrassment, a public embarrassment, and that's nothing that any utility would ever want to experience. Particularly, investor-owned utility, but as well as a municipal utility. It's got to be executed, and it's got to be executed carefully.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today, Bill. And please join us for our next session by clicking on the Watch Next Session at the bottom of your screen. Thank you.
Thank you.